And now for the supermoon. Have you seen it? Well, you will later on tonight. It means that our regular moon is going to appear bigger and brighter than normal as the moon hits the closest point to Earth, and it happens this weekend. These pictures show the moon's supermoon last night that was seen around the world. NASA says the next supermoons will come in August and September, and man, oh man, does that make for a beautiful sight at night.
I like it.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth." And it was so.
The Israelis say the terror group Hamas has now racked up some 600 rocket attacks in recent days. This while we are getting new video of Palestinian protesters raining Molotov cocktails down on Israeli defense forces, now apparently just awaiting the word to rush into Gaza, tens of thousands strong.
The burden of the word of the Lord for Israel, saith the Lord, which stretcheth forth the heavens and layeth the foundation of the earth and formeth the spirit of man within it. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it.
We affirm that there will be no appeasement with the Israeli occupant who started the war and the aggression. They will pay the price of this war and this aggression with fear, killing, and the destruction brought by rockets of Al-Qassam brigades.
Keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Edom, and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagarim, Ebal and Ammon and Amalek, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre, Asser also is joined with them, all and the children of Lot. Selah. Do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jabin at the brook of Kison, which perished at Endor. They became as dung to the earth. Seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. For Gaza shall be forsaken, and Ashkelon a desolation. They shall drive out Ashdod at the noonday, and Ekron shall be rooted up. Woe unto the inhabitants of the sea coast, the nation of the Kerethites. The word of the Lord is against you. O Canaan, the land of the Philistines, I will even destroy thee, that there shall be no inhabitant. And and the sea coast shall be dwellings and cottages for shepherds and folds for flocks. And the coast shall be for the remnant of the house of Judah. They shall feed thereupon. In the houses of Ashkelon shall they lie down in the evening. For the Lord their God shall visit them and turn away their captivity.
مصاحب المسجد محرقة.
Israel escalates its offensive against Hamas. One of the new attacks hitting a mosque in Gaza. The Israeli military says the mosque was hiding rockets, making it a legitimate target under the rules of war.
In just the last few hours, there have been 36 strikes, 36 rockets fired by militants into Israel. 2 of those rockets landed in an unpopulated area outside the city of Dimona, and that is significant because that's where Israel has a nuclear facility. And just moments ago, I heard what sounded like an Israeli airstrike over Gaza just moments ago. I can't see any damage from our vantage point, but those have been taking place throughout the day, those airstrikes, as Israel continues to prepare for a possible ground incursion. We're about 100 yards from the Gaza border, and at this location you can see already in position are Israeli tanks, the armored bulldozers, as well as APCs. There are also, of course, Israeli troops that have been stationed here. It is likely that if there is a ground incursion, these would be the first troops to enter into Gaza. A top priority for any Israeli soldiers that enter into Gaza would be to destroy the launching devices that are used to fire rockets. And as you can see these soldiers preparing now, if they do get the call to enter into Gaza, a debate is taking place here in Israel. It involves the politicians, the political arena, as well as the military. They're trying to determine if, in fact, a ground incursion is the best way to go. Some have argued that continuing the air campaign would be far more effective, or certainly equally effective, and would not result in as many casualties. As that debate continues, these soldiers continue to prepare to enter into Gaza and cross the border. Also continuing diplomatic efforts, Egypt taking the lead in trying to broker some type of a truce. This ceasefire that is now being discussed might in some ways be based on the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas 2 years ago. The question on the minds of many guys is what might be different about this particular truce in order that it also might be longer lasting.
Good morning. The Israeli military pounded the Gaza Strip with airstrikes again this morning. 5 days into Israel's offensive, Palestinian officials say more than 120 people have been killed, including dozens of civilians. The Israeli military sometimes telephones in advance of its airstrikes so that people have time to get out alive. In Gaza City, they evacuated this area and then watched as a house was demolished. Israel says it's targeting terrorist command centres, though in reality they're often the homes of militants. I wish I were a young man, he said. I could wear a suicide belt and go and blow myself up in Tel Aviv. Palestinian militants have fired hundreds of rockets at Israel during this escalation. They've caused some injuries and damage to buildings, but so far no Israelis have been killed, thanks in part to the country's Iron Dome anti-missile defence system, which shoots the rockets down. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to push on with the strikes yesterday. He also refused to rule out a ground invasion and said no international pressure will stop Israel from acting. Anthony.
Holly Williams in Gaza City. Thank you, Holly.
This just moments ago, the United Nations calling for an Israeli-Palestinian ceasefire. All 15 members of the Security Council approving a statement that calls for the de-escalation of violence and the restoration of peace. David Lee Miller has more from the Israeli border with Gaza.
Arthel, the field behind me on the outskirts of the southern Israeli city of Ashdod may look ordinary, but it is anything but. Off in the distance, over my shoulder, you can see Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. And just a short time ago, this particular battery was brought into operation. It intercepted a rocket virtually directly overhead. So far today, militants in Gaza have fired at least 60 rockets into Israel. The Iron Dome system, according to military officials, is 90% effective, and today Israel put an 8th battery into operation. No doubt, they say, it has saved countless lives. Earlier, we witnessed firsthand Israel's preparation for a possible ground invasion into Gaza. We're about 100 yards from the Gaza border, and at this location you can see already in position are Israeli tanks, the armored bulldozers, as well as APCs. There are also, of course, Israeli troops that have been stationed here. It is likely that if there is a ground incursion, these would be the first troops to enter into Gaza. A top priority for any Israeli soldiers that enter into Gaza would be to destroy the launching devices that are used to fire rockets. And as you can see these soldiers preparing now, if they do get the call to enter into Gaza, a debate is taking place here in Israel. It involves the politicians, the political arena, as well as the military. They're trying to determine if, in fact, a ground incursion is the best way to go. Some have argued that continuing the air campaign would be far more effective, or certainly equally effective, and would not result in as many casualties. As that debate continues, these soldiers continue to prepare to enter into Gaza and cross the border. So far during the current conflict, at least 120 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed. The majority, we are told by Palestinian officials, are civilians. But a diplomatic solution might be on the horizon. Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, now a peace envoy, is in Egypt meeting with officials there, trying to broker some type of ceasefire. In Ashdod, Israel, David Lee Miller, Fox News.
Straight ahead.
In terms of the barrage of rockets, we're getting reports that there was a barrage fired at Tel Aviv and the surrounding area there. And I can tell you this, within the past 15-20 minutes, we've seen rockets fired from the vicinity of our location here, heading north towards, fired obviously at Israel. And within the last couple minutes, there were 2 heavy airstrikes, probably just a couple hundred yards from our location. They hit with such an impact and such force that the building we're in shook heavily. Most likely, they were Hamas targets, possibly where those rockets were launched, but I don't know that for sure. That has not been confirmed. But after the impact, we heard screaming, saw some black smoke, heard screaming, presumably the wounded and possibly dead being pulled out of there. We saw a similar scene earlier today. We went to the main hospital here in Gaza City, and right after an airstrike, it was a chaotic and frenzied scene as the wounded, as we later found out dead, were rushed in, many in civilian vehicles. They came in so fast to the entrance, some of them actually slammed into each other as those injured were being pulled out. So far, we've heard the latest toll has been 125 Palestinians hurt, or killed rather, here in Gaza, more than 1,000 injured, and that number is likely increasing as we speak. This, as we continue to get new video from the ground here of these airstrikes, and these airstrikes have been continuous over the past the course of the afternoon and evening here. Rocket fire also being launched, and then the Israeli Air Force countering with the airstrikes. We've also heard what sounds like cannon fire, heavy artillery from off the coast being fired at targets here in Gaza City. And Eric, judging by the last couple hours, at least the time that we've been here, and certainly since all this began on Monday, this is likely expected to continue. And needless to say, it's most likely going to be a long night ahead as I'm hearing yet another jet fighter come roaring into the area. Eric?
All right, John, we can hear that. Just listen just for a second. Those are Israeli warplanes, you think?
Yeah, fighters. They've been circling, those airstrikes that we heard. They got very close. They came roaring in, and then you hear the missile actually come firing into the area, impact, explosion, the force shaking the building, and then you hear the screaming in the distance. And again, these two airstrikes have been very, very close to our location. And the sound of these fighters has been a constant sound, the growl, the roar of the engines, and also, Eric, the humming that we're hearing right now of drones overhead.
You can hear the warplanes and you can hear the drones. John Huddy, live on the ground. Very vivid report. Thank you, John, so much.
All that mounting international pressure to end violence having no effect on the ground. At this point, Israeli leaders vowing to continue the Gaza offensive. Hamas not backing down either, raining down more rockets on Israel. Our Middle East correspondent Paula Sleer has more from Tel Aviv.
The situation here in Israel is extremely tense. Barrages of rockets continue to be fired at the country from Gaza. There was one incident when a gas station in the city of Ashdod was hit and one person has been seriously injured. In fact, that is the most serious incident so far. 90% of the rockets that are coming from Gaza are intercepted by the Iron Dome anti-missile defense system. On Friday night, 3 missiles were intercepted over the skies of Tel Aviv, and I was at an open field when this happened, and it's almost surreal. People rushed out of their cars, and there's almost a few seconds before they can get to the ground or hide behind some kind of building. Many people just watching this interception in the sky, and when it happened there was this huge applause that went up from people on the street where I was. But certainly people are afraid. What we're hearing from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is that he will not back down, and he will certainly not back down to international pressure. He says, and I'm quoting, that the battle is progressing as planned. So there is the sense on the ground that this could ultimately lead to a ground offensive. As you well know, thousands of reserve soldiers have been called up. The head of the Israeli army is also saying that Gazans made a grave mistake by launching rockets at Israel and that they will bring disaster upon themselves. So certainly the rhetoric that's coming out at the moment does seem to suggest that this operation will continue and possibly continue for quite some time.
Once again, Egypt finds itself helping to negotiate a truce between Israel and Hamas. Hamas is closely linked to the Muslim Brotherhood, which Cairo has vowed to crush. The Egyptian government has brushed aside suggestions that it has taken a back seat and declared it will do its best to negotiate a ceasefire. Adal Maruki has more.
Criticism to Egypt's response to the violence in Gaza is gathering momentum. Some have even dared suggest the government has taken a back seat.
The government has not fulfilled its role. We demand an immediate Egyptian intervention to impose calm and end the massacre promptly and decisively.
Some, including Hamas's political wing leader Khalid Mishal, called on the Egyptian army to get engaged and end the violence. It's a call that was not directed to the army when Islamist President Mohamed Morsi was in power.
Egypt is moving slowly and cautiously because the current situation raises suspicion. If the crisis was sparked off by the killings of the Israeli youth, why has the offensive moved to the Gaza Strip? Some reports allege that the violence is well calculated. Hamas to corner the new Egyptian administration and Israel to test its response. Many focus on the deal brokered over a year ago, but no one mentions that this deal contains clauses that requires the Palestinian resistance to acknowledge Israel, something the Hamas will revolt against. So there is some irrational international pressure over Egypt.
Back in 2012, Morsi opened the Rafah passage immediately for humanitarian aid, while el-Sisi opened it conditionally. The UN Secretary General has condemned the restrictions over the Egyptian passage, but didn't mention Israel's 6 passages with Gaza, which are all locked. On the other hand, the Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry confirmed on Thursday that Egypt is making all efforts to stop the Israeli aggression over Gaza. A crucial step for regional stability, Shoukry explained.
There might not be good ties between Egypt and the US or the Egyptian presidency and Hamas, but there cannot be a solution in the Palestinian crisis without Egypt either. No one can doubt that.
The Egyptian administration's relation with Hamas would not allow it to show support through physical presence in the Gaza Strip, like what Morsi's cabinet did in 2012. Egypt is saying it's not laying back, and it's doing its best to negotiate an exit for the safety of all Palestinians. Adil Mahroui, CCTV, Cairo.
In 2008, there was an incursion that Israel made into Gaza to try to really stop this missile attacks and get to these launchers and so on. And yet here we are, a few years later, back again. and we were back in 2012 doing the same thing. That time Israel didn't go in a ground invasion. What is the goal of the Israeli response so far? Are they fated every 2 years or so to have to do this all over again?
Well, Israel has been very reluctant to reoccupy the Gaza Strip since it withdrew all of its settlers, all of its settlements in 2005. I think they're going to need to start rethinking that proposition. Part of the problem, Hamas now has these very long-range rockets that are hitting in areas of central Israel, all the way up to Haifa in the north. And that's because there is extensive tunneling between Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula into Gaza.
Right.
Well, I think Israel will have to, at some point, reoccupy a wide corridor to separate Egypt from Gaza in order to prevent that kind of smuggling, because these rockets are getting increasingly sophisticated.
Is it possible to eliminate Hamas as a military and political force with that kind of a ground incursion? Tony Blair, the former British Prime Minister, said this week it was not possible.
No, I think that's a silly proposition. Israel has been in the Gaza Strip before. Now, it would be...
You think they can eliminate them as political and military?
Absolutely. Hamas is not a major military threat to Israel, in the sense it's no match to the Israeli Defense Forces, but it would require a sustained operation in Gaza that would have political cost to Israel, that would certainly result in Palestinian casualties and some Israeli casualties as well.
Matt, what do you think about the U.S. response so far, which seems to be will be a mediator between the two?
Well, it's not clear who they would mediate between, first of all, and second of all, we have very little leverage there, as in so many other parts of the world these days. You know, the failure of this ill-conceived effort to negotiate peace between Palestinians and Israel that John Kerry launched, that collapsed in spring. The mediator just resigned. So we have very little capital to use with the Israelis or with the Palestinians, and not many people take us seriously there anymore.
So there's not much we can do except let it play out.
Firefighters in the Gaza Strip tackle a blaze in the wake of an Israeli artillery strike. Up the coast in Israel, a rocket fired from Gaza hits a petrol station, causing a huge explosion. A deadly cycle of tit-for-tat attacks that's left civilians on both sides of the border in fear for their lives.
The children are terrified. We have small children in our houses, and to have to run every moment to a secured space is not a solution. We need to enter once, all the way, and do the job right.
Israel has confirmed preparations are underway for a possible ground attack, with tanks and artillery massed along the border, and some 33,000 reserves already mobilized. But a ground incursion would not be without risk. A ground war would certainly see casualties on both sides. By the fourth day of Operation Protective Edge, there were no deaths on the Israeli side. The Palestinian toll hit 100 in the same period, making Hamas more determined to fight back. As the battle between Israel and Hamas militants intensifies, so do diplomatic efforts to broker a ceasefire. But neither of the warring sides appear ready to back down, and the escalation, much to the alarm of the international community, is sure to render peace an ever-distant prospect.
Now, Israel's Deputy Defense Minister, Danny Danon. Welcome, sir. Great to have you here today.
Good afternoon, Uma. Great to be on your show again.
Let me ask you, the Hamas militants have been hit hard, with Israel striking more than 1,000 targets. I know that Israel has gathered thousands of troops who are ready to move ahead with a ground operation in Gaza. Is that going to happen soon?
Uma, we want to live a normal life, to live peacefully in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, and the Hamas is not allowing it. They're sending missiles on a daily basis, every night. We will do whatever necessary, even if it means that we have to send ground troops, tanks, we will do it. You know, the Hamas is playing a double war crime. They're using the civilian population to send missiles, and they're also targeting civilian population here in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Our troops are ready, and I think it's only about a matter of time until we will decide to move forward in order to bring tranquility and peace to the region. Unfortunately, with the Hamas, the only language they understand is the language of tanks and air force.
When you say it's a matter of time about a decision about moving ground troops into the region, what are we talking about? Are we talking about a few hours or a few days?
Prime Minister Netanyahu said in few occasions. If they will be quiet in our side, they will be quiet in the other side. But what we see is exactly the opposite. We see more missiles, we see them reaching a larger range, and that's something we cannot accept. I know that the people in Gaza cannot speak, cannot come and say what they really want to happen. The Hamas is controlling Gaza today. It's Al-Qaeda-based ideology, and that's why we are using the Air Force, but we are getting ready to use other means of force in order to bring peace and tranquility to the region. In the past, we saw that only when we actually used hard force, we were able to bring stability to the region.
Well, it sounds like definitely a decision is going to be made soon. With the reported rocket strikes out of Lebanon, how concerned are you about a renewed conflict now with Hezbollah as well?
We are watching very carefully all the borders. Also in Lebanon, it's not only Hezbollah. You have other Palestinian Islamic forces. We are aware of that. But the main focus now is in Gaza. And I think we have to be very cautious about what will be the outcome of the conflict, because people are watching. People in Iraq, in Iran, in Syria are watching what Israel is doing now in a time of conflict. And we have to make sure that the bottom line will be that you don't mess with us. We are a peaceful nation, a democracy, but when you start sending missiles into our cities, we know how to hit back.
Well, the Iron Dome rocket has been able to intercept more than 130 incoming rockets. However, we understand that Hamas has fired rockets that have been able to travel deeper into Israeli territory, close to your big cities, than ever before. What impact has this had on the military response so far from your side?
The Iron Dome is a great example of the cooperation between Israel and the US, the great innovation and technology. And we know that the Hamas is frustrated because there is no people lining up in Israel in terms of casualties, and we are happy about it. But still, I'm telling the civilians, Iron Dome is good, but it's not perfect. You have to hear and do what we order the people to do in terms that there is rockets being fired into our cities. But I think the Hamas knows today that the people in Israel are very strong. They are willing to pay the price. Personally, I can tell you with my daughters that they are willing to sleep in the shelter every night, but they know it is for a good cause, that in the future they can sleep soundly. All
right, let me ask you this really quickly. We're running out of time, unfortunately. But President Obama has offered to broker a ceasefire. Is there any hope that we could see a ceasefire anytime soon?
First, we have to understand when you speak about a ceasefire, it's between Hamas and Israel. It's like I will tell you that President Obama will sign a treaty with Osama bin Laden, with Al-Qaeda. Those people, you can actually buy ceasefire or get into a ceasefire only when you show that you are strong and that you are determined. I think it is too early to speak about it.
All right. Danny Danon, so good of you to join us during a very difficult time in your country. We appreciate it, and we wish you all the best.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu Friday evening said the offensive targeting Islamist militants was going well and would continue, without spelling out any details.
We have so far attacked more than 1,000 targets, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and other groups, and there are still more to go.
Netanyahu said no international pressure will stop Israel.
We are weighing all possibilities, and we are preparing for all the possibilities.
But will that include a ground incursion? Palestinians are certain it will. Israel so far has been vague. A joint air and ground offensive 5 years ago left some 1,400 Palestinians and 13 Israelis dead. Regional and global leaders urged Israeli troops to stay out and reiterated their calls for a ceasefire.
Security Council members called for de-escalation of the situation, restoration of calm, and reinstitution of November 2012 ceasefire.
A call for now both sides appear to be rejecting.
We affirm that there will be no appeasement with the Israeli occupant who started the war and the aggression.
Netanyahu says he told world leaders that he spoke with on Friday that he has a mandate to defend his people. Hamas officials are saying pretty much the same thing. With both sides determined to stand by that commitment, the fighting, it appears, will get worse before things here get better. Rowie Rettenberg, CCTV, Tel Aviv.
And the conflict is expanding. The Israeli military says it fired artillery shells into southern Lebanon Friday in retaliation for rocket fire coming from that area earlier. The Lebanese military confirmed that 3 rockets were fired toward Israel in the morning and says it's investigating who was behind the attack. Recent shelling from Lebanon has been blamed on radical Palestinian groups. The area is a stronghold of the Shia militant group Hezbollah. China has called on Israelis and Palestinians to seek an immediate ceasefire and resolve their conflict through peaceful means.
China is deeply concerned about the escalating Palestine-Israel tensions, which caused many casualties. We denounced any attack against civilians. The latest Israel-Palestine conflict shows military forces cannot resolve the issues, but create more feud and hatred and drift away peace. The Israel-Palestine conflict can only be solved through peaceful means. China is willing to work with the international community to play a positive and constructive role in pushing forward the Israel-Palestine peace process.
Qin Gang also stressed that both sides should practice restraint and avoid any action that may lead to escalation of violence. He made the remarks today after Chinese diplomats met with the Israeli and Palestinian ambassadors in Beijing to discuss the ongoing conflict.
Now, this is the first official response from the Security Council, and a long-awaited one. We've been expecting something like this for several days, but as you can see, it is regarded as a mild statement, one that is delicately and carefully worded, reflecting the testy situation on the ground. It is also a downgrade of a draft resolution that had been put forward by Arab states late this week, led by Jordan, who represents Arab states at the Security Council.
The Israeli military is firing back in defense. This as the United Nations Security Council has called for a ceasefire. But Israeli Deputy Defense Minister Danny Dayan says that's like the U.S. settling with the 9/11 terrorists.
When you speak about a ceasefire, it's between Hamas and Israel. It's like I will tell you that President Obama will sign a treaty with Osama bin Laden, with Al-Qaeda. Those people, you can actually buy ceasefire or get into a ceasefire only when you show that you are strong and that you are determined. I think it is too early to speak about it.
Ambassador Dan Gillerman is the former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, a Fox News contributor, and joins us now from Tel Aviv. Ambassador, it seems that the Hamas militants now have the Fajar 5 Iranian-made rockets that can hit Tel Aviv. How does Israel stop them?
Well, Eric, I'm speaking to you from Tel Aviv, and actually I was at a movie with my wife and a couple of friends, and the siren sounded. The mall at which the movie house was evacuated, but I just went to my car and drove to the studio in order to tell you folks and the world through Fox that, you know, the name of the movie was This Is How It Works, with Michael Douglas and Diane Keaton, and my message to the Hamas is, this is not how it works. This will not work. You will not cower us. You will not make us run. And you may run, but you cannot hide, and we will get them. We will get this ugly snake of terrorism, these animals who are keeping their own people as human shields, who are putting missiles inside hospitals and underneath mosques and making families live among missiles. If you go to sleep with a missile, don't be surprised if you don't wake up in the morning. We will not stop. We will not agree to a ceasefire. We will finish the job and make sure that Hamas, after this is over, will never be able to raise its ugly head. And this monster, which is threatening not just Israel, but the rest of the world, will not be able to continue to do this dirty, dirty work.
You know, Ambassador, you just very vividly and eloquently described the conditions that Israelis are living under. What do you think would happen if missiles were raining down on Albuquerque or Memphis or San Diego or Fort Lauderdale or Dallas or Tampa or Raleigh? What would we do?
Well, I think this is the first question I would ask you, and I would ask every member of the Security Council who is telling us to talk to Hamas and to have a ceasefire. What would you do? What would the United States do if missiles rained down from Albuquerque, as you said, from either Mexico or Canada? What would France do if missiles rained down from Germany? What would Russia do if missiles rained down on it? What would China do? All these sanctimonious people who are preaching to us, who are they to preach to us? The Russians who wiped out Chechnya after a few missiles, the Chinese who cleared out Tiananmen Square, the British who sent out thousands of troops to a remote island in the Falklands, thousands of miles away from their own territory because of a couple of sheep. We are defending our homes. We are living in a very tough and very dangerous and brutal and cruel neighborhood, and we are actually on the front line of terrorism. We are fighting not just for us, we are fighting for you, for our American friends, for our friends around the world, because this is the first line of defense, and we have to make sure we destroy those animals who are trying to destroy us. And I assure you, Eric, we will not stop until we do.
Ambassador Dan Gilliman from Israel, which is under a barrage of rockets from Hamas and is fighting back, maybe for Israel's very survival. Thank you so much.